In a recent video, Alex Malpass criticized my defense of the successive addition argument, which demonstrates that the series of earlier events is finite. Now, once again, Alex Malpass has failed to understand my argument because he has failed to read my book carefully. And he has done that multiple times in the past. So let me explain my arguments in my book first before I respond to Malpass' objection. Okay, this is page 207 of my book, The Teleological and Kalām Cosmological Arguments Revisited. And this book is open access. You can download it for free and read for yourself. On page 207, I formulate the argument as follows. Premise 1, if the series of earlier yearly events is an actual infinite, then a person marking a stroke each year will have experienced the accumulation of an actual infinite series of strokes by a one-by-one process. Okay, so think of a person, say he mark a stroke each year by, say for example, dropping a stone into an infinitely big box. Okay, one stone plus one stone plus one stone. And if the number of earlier years is infinite, right? By now, there would have been infinite number of stones, right? In the box, okay? So premise 1 is obviously true. Now, however, premise 2 says that it is not possible for a person marking a stroke each year to experience the accumulation of an actual infinite series of strokes by a one-by-one process. Why? Because a one-by-one process is a plus finite process. And a plus finite process will always equals to plus finite. Why? Because plus finite equals plus finite, right? Okay, so, and therefore, it is not possible that the series of earlier events is an actual infinite, right? Because it results in a contradiction, right? It's a modus tollens argument, right? If P, then Q, but not Q, therefore not P. Okay, so now I think the key step is premise 2. Okay, so that is where Malpass disagree, but I think he has misunderstood my defense of premise 2. So I explain my defense of premise 2 on page 208 on my book. The argument against traversing an actual infinite is based on the nature of a one-by-one process that is finite plus finite equals finite, right? So it's not based on starting at a point and therefore does not beg the question. It does not assume a beginning, right? But rather is based on the nature of a plus finite process. Okay? So to elaborate, without begging the question by assuming a starting point or by presupposing whether the number of events earlier than any time t, p is infinite or not, think of a series of events in the midst of being constituted by a one-by-one process. Okay, so there's an event p produced at time tp. Okay, so notice that I state that there's one event p produced at time tp. I did not state or assume that the total of one event has been produced by tp, which is false, right? If there are events earlier than tp, right? So I'm not assuming that tp is the beginning, right? I'm not assuming any beginning. Okay, what I'm saying is just that in the nature of the process is that it's plus 1 at TP, right? There's something added at TP. I'm not saying that there's a totality of 1 at TP, right? So I'm not assuming that TP is the beginning. Okay, so there's plus 1 at TP, there's event P, followed by event Q at TQ. Okay, so together, right, plus 1 equals plus 2, right? So they constitute 2 events. And then they are PQR, right, at TP, TQ, TR, respectively. And together, right, plus 1 equals plus 3, right? So plus finite is still equals plus finite, right? And so on. So the series of events is formed by each event, by the addition of each event. And the series is constituted by a finite number, 1, and a finite number, another event, and 1 and another together, plus 1 equals plus finite, right? They constitute a finite number of events added. And it's not possible that this constitute an actual infinite number of events. Why? Because plus finite equals plus finite. Okay, so the above conclusion is not based on presupposing a particular time as a starting point, or that the number of earlier events is not actually infinite, and therefore it is not question begging. Rather, the conclusion is based on the nature of a one-by-one sequential process, right? Finite plus finite equals finite. Okay, and this is how the concrete series of events is supposed to be constituted. For example, P, okay, so you see on the diagram here, right? P is added in the midst of the process, right? And so, for example, P can be, say, marking a stroke on a piece of paper at a certain year, or you can think about dropping a pebble into a box each year as a way of marking a stroke. And Q could be marking a stroke, dropping a pebble the next year, right? And so, plus one pebble, right, is in the process of forming a series of pebbles or strokes. Okay, and then you can use a mathematical induction proof, which is actually a deductive proof, right, which shows that plus finite is always equals to plus finite. Okay, so this can be mathematically proven, right? All right, so that is the essence of my argument, and in the rest of chapter 5, I reply to various objections. Okay, so let us now take a look at Alex Malpass' objection.
I think that when I try and understand this part of what he's saying here, it seems to me that there's an obvious kind of disambiguation, and I want to say on one version of the disambiguation there's one type of problem, and on the other version of the disambiguation there's a different problem. So what I mean, let's show you a picture. So on the top here you've got like this is 2018 and it's added so somehow to 2019, and the output is finite. So you've got one thing and another thing, and the output of that is finite. 1 + 1 = 2, basically. But you might think that, that's not what we mean when we say that 2019, happened. It didn't just get added to 2018. It wasn't just 2 years when 2019 finished. There'd been loads of years, right? What we should be thinking about is that it's all of the years up to 2018 is a big stock of years that 2019 was added to. And if the past is beginningless, then you're just saying that there's already been infinitely many years, and 2019 gets added to it, and then it's like a guest adding itself to Hilbert's Hotel, and it was infinite before. You add one, it's still infinite, right? So I think on the first reading, where you say, look, what's going on is 2018 is finite, 2000 because it's 1 year, and 2019 is finite because that's 1 year. Then what you've got is an output that's finite because 1 + 1 = 2. The problem with that is that it looks like it's question begging, because time didn't start in 2018, right? It's not just 1 year plus 1 year, not in any significant sense, right? I mean, like it can be if you forget about the history before 2018, but if you don't forget about the history before 2018, what you're looking at is the bottom row. So it's not clear how you can maintain this top row, which looks like it's question begging. It basically just seems question begging, or you're just willfully forgetting that 2018 had a past of stuff that came before it. And after all, the point of the argument is supposed to be showing that whatever the past was that came before 2018, it couldn't have been actually infinite, but pretending that 2018 is on its own somehow, and then just in 2019 joined it. And then the union of those two was finite, just doesn't seem doing justice to what's going on, right? It seems like it's question begging in the sense that it looks like it's pretending that 2018 was the beginning. Obviously, if it was 2000, if we just called the first year 2018, then any subsequent additions of new years that were added to it would mean the overall was finite, right? Because if I start counting now, as we saw before, if we grant all of that stuff that says egg count up can never be actually infinite, then fine. But it just seems question begging, because what we're talking about is a beginningless count now, because what we want to know is there any reason for thinking that a count down is impossible? And, just showing that a count up is impossible isn't going to do that. But then the bottom row, so the top row seems question begging, but then the bottom row is just not finite, right? The infinite plus 1 is infinite, not finite. So it's not a question of finite plus finite = finite, it's infinite plus finite = infinite. And so that's not going to work either. And that's all I've got for the time being.
We have watched Alex Malpass' objection to my argument. Now, does his objection work? Of course not, right? His objection is based on a misunderstanding of my argument. Okay, so he draw this diagram, there's a top row, there's a bottom row, and obviously the bottom row is not what I meant, right? But he's talking about the top row, and he claims that, I say that, there's one stroke mark at 2018, one stroke mark at 2019, and he claims that it's question begging, right? Because he claims that I seems to have forgotten that there are series of events before 2018, right? So he thinks that I'm assuming that 2018 is the beginning point, and then but that is question begging, right? But however, that's not what I meant, right? As I said earlier, my argument does not beg the question because I'm not assuming that 2018 is the starting point. Rather, what I'm saying is that there's one pebble, one stroke or one pebble added at 2018, and there's one pebble added on 2019. So I'm not assuming whether or not 2018 is the beginning point, but rather I'm illustrating the nature of a +1 process, okay? And so, and that will always equals to plus finite, as I already explained, okay? So my argument doesn't beg the question, right? So the problem with Alex Malpass' objection is that he's focusing on the completed series, right? His diagram, his two diagrams is focusing on the completed series. He's assuming that either the series was already completed, there's an infinite number of completed events, or I'm saying that 2018 is the beginning of the completed series, right? However, this missed the point of my argument, right? Premise 2 of my argument is not talking about the completed series. Rather, premise 2 of my argument is talking about the nature of the process that led to the formation of the series. And the nature of the process is plus finite. Okay, so I'm not referring to the number of stones in the box, right? Rather, I'm referring to the process of dropping the stones, okay? So drop one means +1 plus finite, and drop another plus finite. So at every so the series of stones in the box, right, is supposed to be formed by +1, right? Process, that's the nature of the process. But the problem is that +1 plus finite is always equals to plus finite, right? And so this process can never lead to the accumulation of an infinite number of stones in the box. So that is what premise 2 is about. Okay, so premise 2 is about the nature of the process that led to the formation of the series. Premise 2 is not referring to the series, right? The completed series. And that is why Alex Malpass, his objection completely missed the point, right, of my argument, because he's referring to the completed series in the box, whereas my premise 2 is referring to the process of plus finite, which is always equals to plus finite. Okay, and so Malpass has failed to rebut premise 2 of my argument, and given premise 1 and premise 2, my argument demonstrates that there's a contradiction if the number of earlier events is infinite, and therefore the number of earlier events cannot be infinite. That's the successive addition argument, which proves that the number of earlier events is finite. And this argument is a sound argument. Both premises are true. Deduction is valid. Modus tollens, right? Therefore, the conclusion is true, and therefore we can know that the number of earlier events is finite. And Alex Malpass, he has misunderstood my argument, and therefore he has not successfully rebut my argument. Okay. Now, for replies to other objections to the successive addition argument, you can check out my book, where I also demonstrate that the argument actually works on the B theory of time as well, right? So the argument will work on the A theory of time. It will also work on the B theory of time. So no matter what theory of time is true, my argument will still work. Okay, so I hope you'll read the rest of my book. Read it carefully. Don't be like Alex Malpass, who has often failed to read my book carefully. Okay, so read it carefully, understand it carefully, and you will see why the Kalām cosmological argument is a sound argument, which demonstrates that God exists.